Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. I'm Kristin, and today we are digging into one of the biggest failures of leadership in modern government, the U.S. Department of Education.
Oh my goodness, my mouth is watering on
I
this
know.
one. I'm not kidding. By the way, I'm Ron. And,
Ron's here. Sorry, I got so excited.
we're going to cut through the nonsense. Now, we are a leadership podcast, but sometimes current events, even political things, need to be looked at through a leadership lens. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Because the Department of Education isn't just about funding, it's about leadership choices that shape the future of our children, which of course is the future of our nature. So folks, if you love big government, we're going to warn you right now, you might want to detach your emotions or maybe listen to a different podcast, because you're going to have to put on a practical lens and listen to the factual basis that we're going to lay out about the Department of Education.
Yeah, I think as long as you can think objectively, I think that would be wonderful. I would challenge anyone with opposing viewpoints to give it a shot, see how it goes for you. And, you know, it's exactly it. Like you were saying, poor leadership creates a bureaucratic bloat. And let's be honest, being bloated doesn't feel well. So think about that. If you've eaten too many carbs, you're laying in bed at night, you feel bloated, feels like crap, feels horrible. And that's what it's like when a government waste, we've bloated salaries. We've all heard that term. That person has a bloated salary. What happens? Usually they get fired, they get cut, they get retired early because they have a bloated salary. So we shouldn't be doing that, especially when the taxpayers' dollars are going towards it. And let's be honest, it's destroying student outcomes. So today we're going to talk about how the Department of Education became a leadership failure, why strong state leadership produces better education results, and how leaders at the state level are making bold, decisive moves to fix education.
That's exactly right. And we've always said this, that leadership's about making the hard decisions, and they're not always popular. And you just can't throw money at a problem and think it's going to go away. Kristin, it reminds me of those parents who never want to spend any time with their kids, so they just give them a tablet or put them at the TV and let them watch until it's bedtime, and they do their thing. And that's what we've been doing to education for a long time. Our scores have reduced significantly. By the way, Kristin, if we were like number one in education, we would be doing a different topic if it worked, but it just doesn't work. So hear us out, folks.
It's a good point. Excuse me. It's a good point that you make there, Ron. Okay, so let's talk about the leadership failure of the U.S. Department of Education. So let's get real. Education in America is not failing because of a lack of money. It's failing because of a lack of leadership. And I like what you just described with, I see it in restaurants all the time. The parents throw a tablet at the kids to shut them up, and then they have a quasi-family dinner, but it's throwing money at the problem, really, like you're saying. And that's what the tablet has done. So the U.S. spends more per student than almost any other country. Yet we rank 40 out of 40. Even though I'm seeing that was an incorrect statement made by Trump, you have to dig for those numbers, but that is the number. And that's industrialized nations and education outcomes. Okay, so that's where that number comes from.
We've got to realize that our country is dictated by lobbyists. And the leaders are more concerned about politics or maybe the political movement of the day. We've talked a lot about DEI. We'll mention that again, diversity, equity, inclusion. But the DOE was reestablished in 1979 under Jimmy Carter. And since then, and when we say the DOE, we're talking about the Department of Education. Since it was established in 1979, spending has skyrocketed. Bureaucracy has grown, of course, and student performance has not improved. That says it all right there.
Yeah.
That says it all. All you got to do is go, well, that didn't work.
Exactly. Enough said, right? So good leaders are going to assess results. Okay. I don't know. It's been a long time since Carter was in office. I mean, I don't think people have been assessing results here. Once you assess results, you adjust and course correct. But what has the Department of Education done? They've doubled down on failed policies, and that is not leadership. That is incompetence, folks.
And you know what's interesting? Congress, of course, they, established the budget. None of them would run their own private company the way they run the government and our tax dollars. They would not. There's no way. If, I'm looking at some things, I'm about to do my taxes. There were things that I threw money at, Kristin, and it did not produce any results. So I'm going back through to say, okay, this worked, this didn't work.
Right.
And I'm going to do better this year because I've done a little bit of a gap analysis that we've talked about. And it is just mind-boggling. But what happens is it's so big that people just turn their head and they take care of each other. I'll get you this many teachers if you'll get me this many roads. And it just all gets bundled together, and it's time for it to stop.
Right. And I like that you said that, because a lot of politicians also have businesses. And it is pretty wild, because that they're ran completely different. So,
but Kristin, let me interrupt.
Yeah,
I do have to say one thing. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Our politicians, you are really good at the stock market, apparently.
Yeah, they are.
There's my congressional compliment.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that was coming. Spot on. All right, let's talk about state level. When we say state level, what do we mean? Amendment 10 to the Constitution was ratified on December 15th, 1791. It makes clear that any powers that are not specifically given to the federal government nor withheld from the states are reserved to those respective states or to the people at large. What does that mean, Ron? Break it down.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. It's literally saying, we do not want bloated government. They're saying that we've told you what the federal government should do, and anything that's not mentioned needs to go to the states or to the people. So I said this before Kristin and I started recording. I said, if our founding fathers could literally see the size of this mammoth federal government, they would, I'll change a little bit, roll over in their grave. I said die a second time, but they really would. The Constitution is such a powerful document, and it's proven itself over and over to be the best governing document that's ever been established in the world. And yet we keep ignoring some of the warning signs, and that Amendment 10 is a warning. Don't let the federal government get too involved in your personal life, people. That's what they were saying.
Yes. Amen.
Whew. Now,
preach.
I feel so much better. Now let's look at real leadership at the state level, okay? Because we've seen bits and pieces of it, just not enough. Louisiana saw the declining literacy rates, so they scrapped ineffective reading programs and focused on science-backed phonics instruction, and test scores went up. Florida took bold action to eliminate DEI in the public education, shifting the focus back to real learning, math, history, science, etc. Texas leaders expanded school choice, allowing parents, not politicians, to decide where education funding goes. And Kristin, this is the perfect time for me to mention that I did all the things that we're talking about, I did many, many years ago. So I made a decision. I was married at the time. My wife and I made a decision, and we put our children in private school. And I know you're going to be, listeners are going to be going, yeah, you can do that. Let me tell you, there were so many sacrifices. I did not make that much money. And at part of the time, my wife stayed home. So let me tell you, it was a huge sacrifice, but it was worth it. I have to give the school credit. My daughters, they are productive citizens. They work hard. They love God. They love their country. They love other people. Kristin's met my daughters. And I have to give the private Christian education some credit when I say that. What's your thoughts, Kristin?
Yeah, no, and they are wonderful young women. And, I did a similar thing. I didn't go the private school route, but I ended up leaving my role in corporate America and homeschooling the kids because I saw firsthand a broken school system here in the state of Oregon. And I had private conversations with teachers, which they would share with me how frustrating it was that what they were teaching was coming not only from the state, but from the government as well. And they shared with me a few emails, directives, if you will, telling them what they needed to hit on every single day in class. And it wasn't reading, writing, and arithmetic. I can tell you that much. So it's really important that we understand why we're discussing this, because it hasn't worked. And so it's time to take a look. And I think actually, as we record right now, the DOGE team is looking heavily into the Department of Education. And I've heard rumors of eradicating it altogether at the federal level.
So I'm going to take full credit for this, Kristin. One day, if you've listened to us for a while, you know that I worked in DC a lot. That was the head office. And after I'd done all my research, done the things that I talked about, I was walking down the street and I happened to look over, and there's the Department of Education, their big building. And I didn't care who was around me or anything. I pointed and I said out loud, if I am ever president, you are gone, because I knew that it was ineffective and it was just bureaucracy in action. So now,
I love that. Someone heard you, Ron.
Now, talk about manifesting, right?
Yeah.
So if you're driving a car, just try to keep your hands 10 and 2 right now and focus on the road, because we're going to talk a little bit about the money, your tax dollars. Of course, we've learned so much about our tax dollars lately. Isn't it crazy?
Transgender rats.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness. Okay, so get ready. $373 million was wasted on DEI training grants instead of real education.
Wow.
And it's also proven, I have to throw this in, Kristin, you put a group of kids together, they're going to play together. But if you teach them divisiveness, they will embrace that as well.
Right.
So how about we get back to education? Over 100 million. I want people to understand how much money this is spent on DEI initiatives that does not improve student performance. The test scores did not go up. It did not help. And this is the one that is mind-boggling. There, in many instances, there's more federal administrators than there are teachers in some districts. Wow. How is that even possible?
Wow. And it's wild. My dad's a retired teacher from Portland, and he would tell me about, he was kind of a maverick, but he would talk to me about the bloated salaries of all the administrators and how little they knew. And they would have these meetings and they were so detached. They had no idea what was really happening in the classroom or in the schools. And so that's been something that I've known about for many moons. But to see those huge numbers, that should be bothersome to anyone. And, we talk about leaders. Leaders trim the fat. Leaders eliminate waste and focus on what works. And that's why we're seeing Elon Musk's department, the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. They have just terminated over $881 million in Department of Education contracts. And I believe that was just today, the day we're recording. So these contracts were funding DEI programs instead of actual education. $881 million. Really think about that.
That's a lot of money. Imagine if you had real leadership in education reform, which I think we're starting to see that, what you could do with that amount of money. What could those funds do? From teacher salaries, better school infrastructure, and student resources. There are numerous countries that have way better smart board technology and all these things in the classroom better than us, yet we're spending more money. Explain that.
Right. And I can tell you, because I had my children in public school, right? So we had great teachers down the way, but every year, and this was a hard one for me. So Yes, they are publicly funded, right? So they're funded by our tax dollars. Yet every year the teacher had a wish list for which books she or he wanted in their classrooms. And it was basically asking parents to purchase these books for the classroom. And of course, being kind of a bleeding heart, oh yeah, you need these books for the
Yeah.
classroom. And then there were also things like, and this didn't take place with my kids, or teachers, excuse me, but I see this all the time on the neighborhood. Do you have like a neighborhood app out there? I'm sure
Oh,
you
of
guys
course.
have the same thing, right? Okay, so I don't know if you see this, but I see all of the time where teachers are putting together kind of like a GoFundMe,
Yeah.
and it's for supplies for their classrooms. And it drives me crazy because I'm always the person, and then I end up starting to write something, and then I just go, whatever. I speak out enough online, but it's like they're asking for these basic supplies. What are our tax dollars going to? And then we see these numbers, and clearly, I believe there probably really is an issue here where the classrooms are not getting the support they need. But wow.
I don't want to get off on too much of a kick. Number one, teachers, we salute you. We know you have a very difficult job, and this is not about you unless you're teaching some of that weird, crazy stuff. But it's mind-boggling that if we reallocated the right funds, it's not that federal governments can't help states implement education. That's fine. But what we're talking about is if you let the states run it, the pork would be eliminated to such an extent. Teachers would not have to have fundraisers. I can tell you that. They would be able to focus on. And think about this. You take all of that stuff. When we say DEI, it's not just money thrown at it. They're spending hours teaching that. So that's why kids can't read. That's why they can't do math. Imagine if teachers got to devote to the basics of teaching. And then we could add classes that, when you get to be in about the 10th, 11th grade, you need to understand a mortgage. You need to understand how to live, how life works.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of the school systems do not teach people how to be young adults when they move into that role, and they have to try to, figure it out.
Right. And I just want to, we didn't say we were going to talk about this, Ron, but you guys probably have a focus on charter schools there. Is that a thing? You
Yes,
guys have charter schools?
absolutely.
Okay. So here I take issue with charter schools because what I see it as is a way to improve a very small percentage of students' educations, and it generally only goes K through 8. So it's generally like a lottery system. You enter in and you get pulled out, and you get to go to these charter schools. And these charter schools, at least out here, they're sending the students study, say they're studying Spanish, so they get an all expenses paid to Mexico or a country that speaks Spanish. I know students that were studying, Chinese, and so they got to go to China.
Yeah.
Paid for. Okay, why do these select kids get to do that? Why can't we improve the education system as a whole? Why are we focusing on these small little schools when we're just allowing everything to burn to the ground? And so I don't see that as the way out. I see that as just a Band-Aid, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I didn't want to get too far into this. You're right about that. America should be one big charter school.
I know.
We should have great education.
That's my
everywhere.
point.
But there's also a part, I don't want to go down this road right now, but we saw when a lot of the parents try to speak up at school boards, they got demonized. And all of a sudden, you started to realize, wait a minute, there's not a joint effort here. They say it takes a village. This is not a village. The village took over certain leaders of the village, and parents had no say-so on the education of their children. And let's be honest, all people can't provide the transportation and things for their child to go in, a charter school or anything else. So this is an issue that I do think there's still a lot of elitism. Racism sickens me at this point. I've heard so much about it, but I definitely believe there's classism, and it doesn't matter your race. It matters your bank account. And we see that play out. So I hope you guys are getting as frustrated as we are about the lack of leadership in education in the United States of America.
And I'm glad you said that, Ron, because that's my platform has always been turn your anger into action. Be angry. Good. That means you have a pulse, but do something about it. Don't let it fester. Don't let it eat you alive. you have to turn it into action. And, another big problem, going back to, what we're talking about here, there's a complete lack of accountability in Washington. So the Department of Education has no incentive to improve because its failures don't cost them anything. And what I mean by that, there's no leader at the federal level losing their job over low test scores. There's no bureaucrat being held responsible for wasted tax dollars. There's no one in Washington making the tough calls to fix our schools.
It's true, and I can speak from a little bit of experience here. I work for the federal government. I'm gonna say something that people don't know a lot about. The judicial part, the judiciary does do a better job way better than Congress, and probably better than the executive branch. And our budget, I at least had to justify. I went through audits, and they were serious, but in the legislative and executive branch, you just don't see that. You don't hear about it. So it's like, if let's say we're having a get together and everyone they wanted a certain topping on their pizza or whatever, the way the government works is it's just going to order way more pizza than we need. And when you get your pizza, it's got what the government decided they wanted to put on your pizza. It's not going to be individualized. So that's what happens. If we can get power back to the state level, that's going to give them skin in the game. They know the area because let's face it, my story, Kristin. I grew up in an area where, getting on a school bus, there were kids, it took them an hour to get home because, you're behind coal trucks, you're going over mountainous roads. Like, it was crazy. So the state and local leaders, they understand the logistics involved in their own communities, and the same amount of money needed in LA or maybe in Portland is not the same that's needed where I grew up in Buchanan County, Virginia. It's just totally different. And the minimum wage should be different. All these dynamics and variables should be considered, and that can only happen at the state level. It's not going to happen at the federal level. They're just going to throw money at it.
Right, exactly. And what department were you with in the government again?
The Administrative Office of the United States Court, and it's under the Supreme Court. When you are in the judiciary, the judicial branch, the head of the judicial branch is Chief Justice Roberts right now, John Roberts. The executive branch, they answer to the President of the United States. And then, of course, the legislative is the Speaker of the House. So, and the head of the Senate. So that's kind of the way things work.
Yeah.
So I was with a separate branch of government, but I was at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center because we had a partnership with Homeland Security. So we were like any other law enforcement, except, we were under the judicial branch of government. And I am so blessed to have got to work in the judicial branch. I mean that. Compared to what I saw in Homeland Security and some of the other agencies, I was pretty proud of my agency.
You should be. And, the reason I ask is because, at least at this point in time, DOJ doesn't have any plans to get in and audit where you were for a reason. Your department's not on the radar for this bloated spending. And so, rightfully so, you mentioned the audits. I don't think there's a lot of that happening in these other areas that we're discussing, including the Department of Education. And, you mentioned that at the state level, you have state governors, education boards. They actually have skin in the game, and federal bureaucrats, they have no one to answer to. They push top-down mandates without consequences. And that's why leadership at the state level is so critical, because local leaders are actually accountable for results.
Yeah, and inspector generals are supposed to literally be unbiased, and they're supposed to go in and inspect and make recommendations, do all that. And that somewhere that lost its way also. Yeah. So anyway, so what happens when leaders step up? We've said this in many different episodes, but let's look at it from the Department of Education standpoint. There are leaders who make bold decisions in education. One of them is Texas Governor Greg Abbott. He's expanding school choice because strong leaders prioritize student success over the bureaucratic control. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, I'm not surprised, is removing political distractions from education because strong leaders stay focused on results, not ideology. And then Tennessee Governor Bill Lee is expanding vocational training because strong leaders align education with real world needs. And Kristin, I'm glad that vocational part is in there.
Yes.
We've got to get back. There are some students that they don't do well with book learning. They like to work with their hands, and vocational training is one of the greatest things because we're trying to bring manufacturing back. You're going to need that. That vocational training is like ground zero for manufacturing.
Yes. I think it's huge. And we think about if someone did study into young men and even just boys in general, that really is the way they should be educated, is more of that hands-on. It's difficult for anyone to sit for 7, 8 hours a day and just mind their P's and Q's, but especially boys. And I think that it's been such a sad state of affairs for so long. They get riddled with the title of ADHD and get put on meds. And really all it is they're a healthy boy that needs to move around. So when we think of vocational training, that couldn't be more awesome. I think it's a fantastic way. And there is a shortage of blue collar employees. So there's a shortage in electricians and plumbers and I mean a wide array of those.
And I don't believe there's a shortage in interest. I believe we've stifled the ability. Where are you going to take the training?
Exactly.
All right, we're going to wind it down, folks. We are very grateful. Hang with us just a little bit. So what's the path forward look like if strong leadership is involved? The takeaways are, number one, the American education system is failing. And I hope we've convinced you of that. We may not know all the answers, but you got to look at it and go, okay, that did not work.
Right.
Talk a little bit about solutions, Kristin.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to decentralize education and empower strong state leadership. And what that really means is giving states full control over education funding. Also, cutting the Department of Education's bloated budget. I'm all about eliminating them altogether, but on a scaled down version, at least cut some of their bloated budget, eliminating DEI and refocusing on real academic success, and then holding education leaders accountable for student outcomes. I can't believe that we're even saying that that's something that should happen, but it's a must, and it's not happening right now at the federal level.
Absolutely. And Kristin, I'm all about, I think there needs to be liaisons. There has to be accountability if the government's going to throw money to states. But you could probably do that regionally and have about 10 employees, I'm thinking, maybe a few admin to administer the money and make sure that it's, actually serving its purpose. But the beauty is you got a matrix. If a state continues to fall below the scoring levels, then you may have a reason to look at your funding. But if they're doing well, it's not hard to find out if schools are doing well. You're going to have safe schools. You're going to have kids who, feel safe. You're going to have great test scores. Like you're going to know. You are absolutely going to know if it's a success or failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're serious about fixing the American education, we need leaders willing to take on the federal bureaucracy, and return power to the states.
That's exactly right. And we need to use our voices. We need to tell Congress we want them to cut through the bureaucracy. We want them to start making hard choices, stop wasting our money. It ends. It's done. You've been exposed, and we're going to take action. And I think it's time for citizens, just like Kristin, she does a lot more than I do, to lend a voice to the people who can, influence things, because this has got to stop. We were on a downward trajectory, and I felt like it was getting faster every week almost.
Right. Yeah, it definitely was. And you have to be willing, you mentioned I speak out. I just, I signed into my messages right before we recorded. I got called all sorts of names every day. You're going to have opposition. Sometimes it's going to be in person. Sometimes it's going to be in a digital format. But you have to be willing. If you stand for something, you have to know that that's just going to come with it. But you have to be stronger and understand that there are real changes that need to happen for the sake and the future of our children in our country. So I highly recommend, be bold. Make a difference.
Yeah, be bold. I've been in a real conflict as well. I had some people trying to say LeBron James was better than Michael Jordan, and it just really pissed me off. So
I just went to Michael Jordan's steakhouse the other night. It was really good.
I've been in a battle. So
I'd be like, I can tell you whose steak is better.
All right, everybody, we appreciate you. Don't forget, please download the podcast. Tell people about it. If you do like to watch, I know you go for my beauty. You can
Definitely.
You can go into YouTube, ring the bell, subscribe, click like. It all helps, but we are a podcast, but we put it on Rumble and YouTube for the people that just like to watch, and that's why we do it. Anything else, Kristin?
I was laughing to myself because I think you know how you say ring the bell?
Mm-hmm.
I hear all the YouTubers do that my son watches. It's so funny. I'm like, Ron, you must be watching some of the Gen Zers.
Oh, I thought you ring a bell at your house. What is that?
At the house. Like, oh my God.
I thought it was like a dinner bell.
Oh, I am humored. No, thank you, everybody.
I spent too much time on YouTube.
I can tell. Ring the bell.
All right,
Smash
everybody.
that like button. We appreciate you guys.
Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.